Well, Ann, we are here hanging out in the podcast studio.
Yeah, it's a nice space.
I was really excited to have you be a part of the Sermon Talkbacks because often on a Sunday morning, you are running in and out between the nursery, making sure things are ready for Sunday school, and that everything is set up in the library for any overflow for families with kids that are crying and can't make it all the way down to the nursery or whatever's going on. And so we had one of those rare Sundays where you were able to listen to the whole service and the sermon. So that
it was nice.
Actually in person and not bits and pieces as you went to each room that has it live streaming.
Yeah, so, exactly.
I was excited. And I thought specifically for this week, you know, when we plan sermons, we try as a staff to, state a theme and not just what the text is gonna be, but what the theme is gonna be.
Yeah.
And so, often you'll hear the music be reflected of that and the prayer and obviously children's time. And I thought specifically this week, your children's moment really fit in with what Rob was talking about in Jeremiah, not just because of the fact that you were talking about a pottery specific story, but because of the grace and love of your grandmother and that symbol. So I wanted to ask you, kind of what inspired you to talk about that and maybe give us more detail on that story, because I thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah, it feels like one of those divinely inspired situations because I didn't hear Rob's sermon until after I shared my children's time.
Yeah.
And he didn't know what I was going to say until he'd already written his sermon. So that was just kind of a God moment, right?
Yeah.
That we both just happened to have stories, and his sermon just really tied in well together. But that story in particular was one of those stories that after it happened, even in the moment, I remember thinking like, this story is etched on my heart. Like this story, I'm going to carry this with me. Like, I think mainly because I was shocked by my grandmother's response. So those of you who didn't hear children's time last week, I talked about how when I was in middle school, we were at our house together with my grandparents, and I was in my grandmother's bathroom, and I knocked over, wasn't paying attention. I was probably being goofy, getting ready, and I knocked over this little cup she had. It was made of pottery. It didn't shatter, but it broke into about 4 pieces.
Yeah.
And she came in to check on me and asked, "How are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine, but I just broke this." And I wanted to seem responsible and mature. And so I was like, "If you want, I'll put it back together for you." Like thinking that she'd be like, "Oh, it's okay. It's broken. Let's throw it away." But she basically called my bluff. She's like, "Oh, yeah, no, you're definitely going to do that. Like, I really love this piece of pottery. It matches my soap dish. Like, I'll get you some super glue, and after lunch, you can put it together." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, cool. I guess I will be doing that." Yeah. And so I did. I glued it back together, and she kind of helped me a little bit, but it didn't look like it originally did when I first started. It looked like it had been broken into 4 pieces and then glued back together.
By a middle schooler?
By a middle schooler, exactly. And it used to be a cup that she'd put water in and drink from in the bathroom. Yeah. And because of the cracks in it, it wasn't going to hold water the same way. Like if she tipped it, it probably would have spilled all over her. So I was like, what is she going to do with this? And she turned it into a toothbrush holder. So she repurposed it. Yeah. She made it into something new. And it taught me a lesson that day, other than just like pay attention to what you're doing when you're in the bathroom and pottery is around you, but also that things can be repurposed. Like just because something's broken doesn't mean it's not useful.
Yeah.
And not important.
And you shared with me beforehand, that you wish that you could have still had that, and that it probably got lost in a move or in the sale of her house or, but you and I talked a little bit beforehand, because I love hearing children's time, and it's unique when a pastor or the children's minister or the youth director can actually be involved in worship, not just leading it, but also participating. And I feel like at Central, we try as a group to all do that. It can be easy to be like, okay, I'm working right now. As soon as Anne's done with children's time, I have to make sure I'm up with enough time to, read scripture, and I have to do it this way. So that leads into Rob, and I got to emphasize the right things. And Rob is already thinking over what he's memorized, but we really do try to listen. And so what was brought to my mind, and we talked about this before, is this idea in like Japanese pottery that when something's broken, it's called, I'm going to totally butcher this, but you can Google it. It's called kintsugi, and it means gold joinery. So like how you broke, little pieces of pottery come away, and so it's never going to be the exact same. But what they do is they repair it with gold, like a precious metal, so that it reminds them that something is broken, but then there's a beauty in the brokenness and the uniqueness of something new. And like, I think your grandmother was like totally capturing that, because instead of being, really upset with you or indifferent about something happening, there was the opportunity for grace. And then every time she used that, I'm sure she remembered the two of you putting it back together.
And me too.
Yeah.
Every time I was at her house and would see it, it always reminded me of the grace that she extended to me. And it was just a beautiful reminder of how it's, like I said before, like if something's broken, it doesn't mean it's trash.
Yeah.
It can still be repurposed. And it almost had like more of a unique, beautiful look to it.
Yeah.
Like it had a special sentiment to it every time I saw it, instead of just like, oh, there's a cup there. But
exactly,
it reminded me of, the grace of my grandmother, but also the grace of God. Because in that story, the potter, I think Rob did a good job of kind of tying how the potter is God, and how even when we mess up in our lives, we have that opportunity to have a second chance. It's not just, okay, well, that's it.
Yeah.
We're done.
Well, that's, I thought that your story and Rob's last story like dovetailed together so beautifully, of the, the child tripping in the hallway and breaking that cup, and the father being, oh, it's not a big deal. We can, we'll just sweep it to the side. And then the mother, in her, Rob said, she was just more in tune with the child's heart. And I
appreciated the mother in that story. Yeah, I did.
And she was saying, no, this does matter. And the father was like, you're right, it does matter to him. And, sometimes when we feel broken, we can think, who would love me enough to put me back together?
Right.
Who do I matter to? And, that's where that grace piece comes in. Now, we didn't talk about this, but so Ann and I are both currently writing papers for provisional ordination in the Methodist Church. And so we've had to, really mine the depths of theology. And, we've talked about prevenient grace, justifying grace, and sanctifying grace. And there's this idea in Methodism that, when we're justified and when we turn towards Christ and commit our life in that way, we're supposed to move on towards sanctification. But it says something, and I know you've read this too, in the Book of Discipline, that, there's always an opportunity for justification. If we've been justified and turn away, God's grace is enough that, it's not just one and done for us. If we're broken, we're not swept away. And, I thought that you captured that beautifully in your children's time. And I want to ask you a little bit about, when you think of God as the potter in that story, what does that, bring to life for you?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things. It always, every time I hear that story, it always reminds me of my grandmother, because she was, for me, the person who encouraged me to go into ministry. She was the first person who just said how excited she was for me when I told her, like, I feel called to go into ministry. And she's like, you're going to be perfect at that. And so when I think of that story in particular, I think of my grandmother as the potter as well as God, which says, is a testament to who my grandmother was as a person. But what I also think about is how we're not alone. God is working with us. If we're the clay in that story, the potter is working with us and trying to help and sculpt us. And so we've always got God's help if we want it. Yeah. We are not an inanimate object. We are creating our own selves and our own lives, but God is there helping us, helping to guide us. And if we chip or if we break or if we fall short, miss the mark, God is there to be with us always. And that's what I just really appreciate, that no matter what happens in the pottery studio, the potter is always there. Yeah. The potter doesn't, just, all right, well, I quit. Yeah. The potter is working with us. God is working within our lives through grace, through love. I mean, and that's what I like about the different understandings of grace, is that we have the gift of grace before we even know it. With prevenient grace. Like, God is already loving us, forgiving us, working in us before we even realize what's happening. And then once we do, we're going to continue to mess up. Like, that's just how it is.
That's humanity.
Even you and I, as
Never.
As perfect as we try to be, we still also can sometimes mess up. I know that's shocking, but it happens. And it just feels good to know that no matter what, no matter who we are, no matter how much we try to be perfect, God is still there working within us to allow us to try to live into that. To that grace, no matter what.
Yeah, I love that. And Rob said something in the first and second service when describing this imagery and how he imagines it is like the clay falling off the wheel. Mm-hmm. But then he said the potter stooped down and scooped it up, and that to me evokes creation and what you were saying with prevenient grace. That before we were ever born, before we were fully knitted together in our mother's womb, the potter was working us and molding us and shaping us, counting every hair on our head. And I just love that.
And it says a lot about individuals, but also as we are as humanity, that God, no matter what happens in the world, God doesn't forget about anyone. Mm-hmm. Like, we're all, a part of this together. And so even though the world may seem a difficult place at any point in time, God has never forgotten about everybody.
Isn't that the best?
Mm-hmm.
Well, would you have any other comments on the sermon? Otherwise, I don't have much. I thought it was a great sermon, but it was only on 4 verses of Scripture, which have so much depth in those 4 verses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, something that can be attested to, and especially in the prophets, is just that they had so much wisdom, so much power, and so much to say that, even in 4 verses, we could have even said more, and I think like I said in the beginning of our time together, is that it's so beautiful how God even worked within Rob and I separately. Mm-hmm. When we came together, it was almost like the potter, weaving us together to make that children's time and sermon work so well, because I had no idea what he was going to say, and he had no idea what I was going to say. And his first story and his last story kind of bookended like those pieces. So it was a fun service to be a part of, but to also be reminded that God's still a part of all of it.
And what do you think this story has to say specifically to our children? That I know in my own life it was so comforting to hear that if I messed up, it was okay. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if this has any shape on the way that you lead our children so well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I think in general, children are learning about the world. Mm-hmm. And where we as adults might think, oh, they messed up, they are just learning how to respond to things. They don't realize they've messed up when they have a tantrum or a moment of frustration. Like, they're just learning how to control and handle their emotions. Yeah. And so it's kind of a nice reminder for those of us who are parents, who are involved in any child's life in whatever capacity, grandparents, caregivers of any kind, that we have the opportunity to also show children that they can receive grace no matter what, even when it's hard. As a parent myself, sometimes it's hard when my 2-year-old has really big emotions, and I just need to take a few deep breaths and make sure he knows that no matter what, I always love him.
Yeah, don't they call it the terrific twos?
Yeah, that's exactly the terrific. Terrific. That is the T word.
Yeah, that's the T word we were trying to think of.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a special message for children, but also to those children, the caregivers, is that it's important for us to also, like my grandmother did for me. Yeah, those moments mean so much more. Like that, like I said earlier, that moment. I can picture specifically that scene in my mind of me talking to my grandmother and us putting that back together. And I can even picture that cup, even though I haven't seen it probably in 10 years. Wow. I can still picture what it looks like, where the cracks were, how it came back together, all of that. And not for her, that wouldn't have been there. Yeah. She had the opportunity to yell at me. She had the opportunity to say, yeah, just throw it away, to make me feel guilt and regret, and she didn't. She used it as a moment to teach grace and love, and, we all have that opportunity if we just take a moment to listen to the Spirit on that. Well,
and I'm really happy we got to do this today.
Yeah, me too.
we have worship this Sunday, and Rob's sermon preview will be up on the website about the same time as this will be, as well as an announcement from Sharon Leduc about our Circle of Welcome family, Afghan family. And so be looking out for that. And otherwise, we will be back next week. I'm very thankful that you were here, Ann.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it.